Welcome to the OML Podcast. We are the Office for Multicultural Learning. I am a new student inclusion educator. My name is Suzan Amiri, and I am honored to be here with my guest today, Dr. Farid Senzai. He received his PhD in Politics and International Relations from Oxford in 2008. He is now a professor of political science at Santa Clara University, specializing in U.S. foreign policy and Middle East politics. And he is also the founder and president of Afghan Relief. It is a nonprofit which provides resources to help the people in Afghanistan. So I'm going to welcome him now.
Thank you so much, Susan. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Of course. So this conversation is going to be a little bit about identity and the role it plays in social justice. So I kind of just wanted to start off by saying that, I take politics in the Middle East with you, and your classroom environment and your involvements outside of teaching are very centered around giving back to your community and the larger Middle Eastern community. And so I just wanted to ask, were you always interested in politics, or did something personal bring you to this side of work?
Well, I've always been interested in politics ever since I was young. I've been following politics. I remember my father used to always listen to the news, and we'd discuss it even at a young age. But professionally, once I got through college and especially got into graduate school, I realized this was something I wanted to continue to do and pursue. And then the focus on the Middle East, as well as U.S. foreign policy and how the U.S. engages with the Middle East, just slowly began to grow from there. It was something I always wanted to play a role in. I felt it was something I was very interested in and became very passionate about. And then, as I immersed myself in this field, the more I realized how much misunderstanding there was about the Middle East and the way that the United States engaged with the Middle East. I just continued to be driven by that to try to understand it myself and then try to explain it as much as possible. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm just curious, did this interest come from, when you were younger and still in Afghanistan?
Well, I, was interested even when I lived in Afghanistan. There's this series of events that took place. It's a story that I share with my students, in fact, on the last day of class. And so my Middle East politics course, I share this story of why I do what I do and why I was driven to do this. And so I won't give it away because it's something I share with my students on that last day. But in many ways, my departure from and how our family left Afghanistan and we came here to the United States, and growing up as an immigrant and growing up, assimilating or trying to adjust and to a new country was part of that. I was always still very connected to my roots in terms of where I was born, because I was born in Afghanistan. I still have extended family in Afghanistan, and so those ties were always there. And then, over the years, while that connection was there, it broadened as well. And so it wasn't just Afghanistan that I was interested in. It became the broader region and the Middle East in particular. And so, and I became very interested in questions of religion and politics and the extent to which and how religion plays out, because I just felt like religion is playing such an important role in the region. And so all of that led me to continue to focus on Middle East politics. And it's a topic that's not easy. It's a complicated topic. The more one studies it, the more they realize how difficult it is to understand all of the different players within the context of the Middle East. And so I just continued to immerse myself in that subject, and over time then started to do it professionally, as I said. So initially, whether it was teaching or then working in Washington, D.C. on foreign policy questions related to the Middle East, all of that just came from that desire to understand this region and try to explain it as best I could to others.
Thank you for sharing that. If you're comfortable sharing, I would love to hear more about, your experience leaving Afghanistan and what it was like to just kind of drop everything that you knew and grew up with and come to this, essentially foreign land that the U.S. is.
Well, we came here twice, in fact. And so initially we came here when I was 4 years old. My father got a scholarship to do his PhD at the University of Wisconsin. And so we came to the United States. We lived here for 4 years. And we were fortunate where my father was, able to get his PhD, but the aim always was to be here for a short period of time and then go back. So I was quite young. I was 4 years old at the time. We very quickly adjusted to life in Wisconsin. We had friends. We went to elementary school there. We became very integrated and assimilated. The other reason it was quite easy, I think, in Wisconsin was because we lived in an environment where many of the students were living there as well, meaning other families were living there, and many of them were from different parts of the country, different parts of the world. And so we had a very diverse group of people. So these were all graduate students. They were all PhD students with their families, and so we lived in the student housing environment in Wisconsin. And I have very fond memories of my time in Wisconsin, just getting used to life in America and, what it was like to live in the U.S. And I still remember, 4th of July holidays and the fireworks. And I remember the snow in Wisconsin and how much snow we would get and making snowmen and, just sort of playing out in the snow and then going to school and just learning basic things about the United States and learning all the songs that you learn when you're in grade school. This land is my land, this land is your land. And, so we really became very comfortable here. We assimilated fairly well. But then, when I turned 8, my father's PhD was over, and so we went back to Afghanistan. And he always intended to go back, and so the family was always here, as I said, for a short period of time. So we were there for 2 years. He became a professor at Kabul University. My father was getting his PhD in agriculture, and so he became a professor at the university in Kabul. But then, soon after, this was in 1978 and 79, the Soviet Union, of course, invaded the country, and war broke out. And it became increasingly very, very difficult and dangerous for families, especially more educated families, because often the educated families are the first ones that are targeted. And so we realized we had to leave. And so it was with that in mind that our parents then planned this way to get out. And, many people in Afghanistan were forced to leave and became refugees and flee the country. And many millions, of course, went into Pakistan, others went into Iran. People that were lucky were able to get on an airplane if they didn't have to walk across very difficult conditions to get out of the country. But that was the state of affairs at the time. We were fortunate. We were able to leave the country, went initially to Saudi Arabia, and then from Saudi Arabia came to the United States. When we came to the U.S., we ended up in Ohio, and the only reason we came to Ohio was because there was one person my father knew who was a former classmate who had stayed in the U.S. and moved to Ohio, and so he said, well, this is one person I know, and so we ended up coming to Ohio and lived in Columbus, Ohio for several years. Once again, because we'd been here once before, we'd learned English, we spoke English, and therefore the adjustment was fairly easy. But once again, because we were older, it was a new environment and getting adjusted. And clearly there was all these issues of trying to assimilate and adjust to a new life when sometimes you were seen as different, especially in a place like Ohio. And we were in Columbus for a few years. From there, my father got a teaching job in a small town called Wilmington, Ohio, which is right between Cincinnati and Columbus. And there's a small Quaker college there called Wilmington College where he was teaching. And that was a more difficult environment in some ways because it was a smaller town, and being seen as different was sometimes projected onto us and our family. But our parents tried really hard to make sure that we adjusted as well as we could, and we assimilated fairly well. I mean, I started playing sports, and sports became a vehicle for me to really integrate into life in Ohio. And I played football and started playing football at a very young age, and it just became my passion. It was all about football. And so, it's hard to not like somebody when they're playing football in a small town where everybody comes together around football games on a Friday night when the high school or the schools are playing. And so football then became a vehicle for me to really assimilate into society. My brother was doing the same with basketball, and we both played baseball as well. And so sports then became a means for us to really adjust and assimilate into life in Ohio. Eventually, we came to California and settled in Sacramento, California. We had family then by that point in the Bay Area here in Northern California, and we ended up settling in Sacramento, and then finished high school in Sacramento, and my family all still lives in Sacramento, so I still really consider Sacramento home. And once again, coming to Sacramento is the same thing, adjusting to a new place. But we had assimilated fairly well, and we'd gotten adjusted to life in America. And because of the sports, I think I continued playing football all through high school. It became a vehicle for me to just really connect with my classmates, my teammates, and the town overall in terms of Friday night footballs became a way for us to always get together, and it was my safe place for me to always feel like I belonged, right? And so that was, I think, very important. My parents also emphasized and tried very hard to make sure that we were adjusted in ways that really assimilated us in all aspects of life in America, so that even though we had some of those cultural aspects of our life in Afghanistan, but in many ways we sort of compartmentalized it. And so there was times where we did things with other Afghan families in Sacramento, for instance. In Ohio, unfortunately, there weren't any Afghans that we knew, but in Sacramento there were Afghan families that we started to spend time with, and occasionally we'd do these family gatherings or go to weddings. And so that was one part of our life, and then the other was, every day in school and adjusting to life in the United States.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. I love Sacramento too.
Yes, you are from Sacramento
also
as well.
from Sacramento. My family's there. I just wanted to touch back on that assimilation point you made. My family assimilated pretty well also, but you see trends generationally on how that translated. So, for example, I have 3 siblings, and all of us have Afghan names. My name is Suzan, but my parents chose the name because in English it's Susan. And then my brother, Joseph, but at home we call him Yusuf, and all 4 of our names are like that. And so it's really interesting to see how, even though my parents don't talk about it, it's like they came here and they had these cultural names tied to them, but at the end of the day, I know it was probably a battle for them to kind of be these different people and kind of stand out. And so I think even in the smallest ways, choosing these names for me and my siblings was a way for them to get rid of that struggle that they had to go through and kind of get rid of that, something I didn't really have to struggle with. But I do remember in middle school, me and my brother were 2 years apart. 6th grade, I was in 6th grade and he was in 8th grade. And whenever my mom would come pick us up, I would usually be walking with my friends to the car, and he would just be finding me, and he'd be like, okay, mommy's here, let's go. But to bother me in front of my friends, he'd be like, Suzan, saying my home name. And it was weird because I think back on that moment and I was so like embarrassed. I almost acted like I didn't know who he was. Like I completely ignored him in front of my friends and I just kept walking. But now that I'm growing up, I'm like actually sharing that name Suzan with people, and a lot of my friends, like my roommates and close friends, have been calling me by like my cultural name. But it's just interesting to see how like though we assimilated, there's these trends that still exist within our, these things that our families tried to adjust for us. And even though I wasn't born in Afghanistan, I still feel so tied to it because of these generational almost, shifts. And almost in a way, I feel like I had to assimilate growing up. But yeah, it's interesting.
That is really interesting because this issue of name is so important. I mean, my experience was quite similar, and I think this happens to a lot of families that they try to provide or give these names that are much easier to pronounce and are seen as more accepting and open for people in the United States. My name, believe it or not, the name I was born with is not Farid. And so I was born with a different name. And I can say it now, since we're talking about this, it's not one that many people know. I was born with a very Afghan name. And so my grandparents, till the very end, still called me by that name. My brother and I both had very different names. And so my name was Rameh, right? Mm-hmm. So that was the name I was born with. And my grandparents continued to call me Rameh, their whole life. They always knew me as Rameh. My brother was Lawang. And so Lawang and Rameh are very Afghan names, and it's very common there. But when we came to the United States, this is the first time when we came to Wisconsin and my father was doing his PhD, most American kids, especially, who was very young, was 5, 6 years old, most kids couldn't say Rameh, they couldn't pronounce the word Rameh. So Rameh became Gomeh, and Gomeh then became Go. And Go then wasn't a word that's good. Obviously, it's a bad word in our language. And so kids would come over and say, can we play with Go? And it just became, my parents did at that point said, you know what, we're just going to change his name. And so it then was changed to Farid. And so Farid is sort of the American version of Farid. Is how it's pronounced. And my brother Lawang then became Fahim. And so Fahim and Farid were an easier name to pronounce for most Americans. That's the name then when we went back to Afghanistan the first time, that's the new name we had. Now, the second time we came back, when we left after the Soviet invasion and came back to the U.S., once again, my parents sort of thought about this. And I remember when we were going through our naturalization to become citizens in the U.S., my parents were asked, what is their name, your kid's name? And so my parents said, let's give them a name that if they face any difficulties in the future, they'd be able to use this name. And so my middle name that ended up, my father's name is Dawood, and so they said, let's go with Dawood as your middle name, but let's make it Americanized, and so David. And so on my license plate now is Farid David Senzai. And the aim was always to have that as an option, as for security purposes, to say, if you ever face discrimination, if you ever face difficulties in life in the United States, you can always tell people, oh, my name is David, and just go by your middle name. And it legally is your name. But think about it. We didn't even use Dawood. It was David, which is, as you said, just like Joseph becomes Yusuf or Yusuf becomes Joseph. The same, Muhammad sometimes then becomes Mo, for instance. And Suzan becomes Susan, right? And so this is our way of sort of Americanizing our names. And in some ways it is for safety. In other ways, it's as we become more assimilated, we want to feel accepted, and this is part of our way to do that. But it's interesting that you said also that as you've grown older, you've become more comfortable with it. I think that's something that often happens is as we get older, the kinds of teasing and difficulties we face when we're kids is less likely to occur as adults. And we end up also becoming, in many ways, very proud of our heritage, our parents are from, or where we were born. And consequently, it's a sense of pride to then begin to be able to share your experience as well as your name and how it's pronounced, and trying to then see that. So that's where these questions of identity come in, where you want to say that, look, I am Afghan. I was born in Afghanistan. I'm a proud Afghan. And my name is Farid. And a Farid is a very common name. And it's a common name. And the way to pronounce it is Farid, right? And so it's interesting that you shared the same story. Even when I initially met you, it was interesting because I always wanted to say Suzan. And that's how I wanted to pronounce it. But I wanted also to hear how others said it. And I noticed that others were saying Suzan or Susan. And then you had also a couple of times said Susan. And so I then transitioned to referring to you as Susan, which is now what I do in class. But certainly if I know that your preference is Suzan, or that is how you would like to have your name pronounced, then certainly that's exactly how we will do it in the future.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's actually interesting because now that I work at the OML, we had our office manager, Casey, make us new name tags and nameplates. And so I was like, okay, I'm in the multicultural office. Let me pull out my actual name, right? So I had her write Suzan on my nameplate. And then once I started, once it came in and once we started meeting all of our coworkers and introducing ourselves, people that I didn't really know or introduce myself to as Suzan would be like, wait, is your name Susan or Suzan? Is it spelled with the O or what? And I was just like, oh, let me just revert back to my legal name. At home I'll be Suzan, and with my friends and people who know that that's my cultural name. But, because it's spelled Suzan legally, I was like, okay, I don't want to, I guess, confuse my classmates or people who have to contact me.
Yes.
But it is interesting.
So most of your classmates refer to you as Susan.
Yeah. Growing up, they always referred to me as Susan. But I think once I came to college, like you said, as we get older, we don't really, if we're lucky, we don't really face bullying and things like that anymore because people are a little more mature and reserved. And so I came to Santa Clara and I started to be around people who were more diverse classmates than, the school I went to in Sacramento. I went to high school in El Dorado Hills, which is a suburb a little north of Sacramento, and it's a predominantly white school. And so, I always kind of made myself fit in with the rest of them, whereas once I came to Santa Clara, I was like, whoa, there's so many different diverse people I go to school with, so many different cultures, and I was almost like, okay, I feel comfortable to bounce back into mine. I wanna share it. I don't wanna just keep hiding away in the corner. This is my time to just bring it back out.
Exactly.
So,
and to be proud of it.
Yeah, and to be proud of it. And I think it's interesting that I went through that because, I've always been trying to figure out where I want to be career-wise or what I want to study in school. And it's interesting that, as I started to unveil my identity and feel more comfortable in it, I realized that what I want to study and the work I want to do has a lot to do with my identity. I want to do social justice work, and I'm still starting off, but it's interesting how a lot of our identity can push us to that activism. And so I think from me personally, because that's how I feel connected to it, I can kind of see that in your story too, and that's kind of why I wanted to ask you about it. Yeah.
No, that's really interesting, and I think it's nice to be able to retain these aspects of your identity, and to, some people really try to either hide them or completely eliminate them, these other aspects of their identity. I think it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful part of, people's history, to be able to retain this, to share this. And that's one of the great things about the United States, is that if people are able to to show this. You see the diversity that's there. We have so many different identities, and that's the amazing thing about identities, is that you have many different aspects of your identity. That's not just one side of it. There's so many different sides of it, and trying to define how one person is very difficult, because we have so many different identities, and the beautiful thing is to be able to express all those different aspects of your identity and to feel comfortable with it. And I think as we get older, we are more comfortable with it. And in many ways, it has shaped who we are. It shapes, not only our history of like where we came from, but also often shapes the direction that we go and what we choose to do. As you said, many of the topics that you pursue in the future, or a career that you pursue in the future, may be in some ways influenced by your identity and how you see yourself, and what kinds of issues and problems and concerns you'd like to address may in many ways be as a consequence of your own identity and how you see yourself today as an Afghan-American with all these other identities that you have as well. And so that's really an important thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think identity is a beautiful thing, and I think it's what makes living in the U.S. really, really nice. But the hard part about that also is that even though there's all these cultures and we're all celebrated, we live in this one place together, we don't have access to resources that will teach us about our culture. Or in schools, I never learned about myself in school, or about, the Middle East in general in school. There's just so much history that wasn't told. And so often I feel like a part of that shying away that I had when I was younger wasn't just myself and bullying, but it was also just, I was like, okay, the world that I have at home isn't the world that's at school or actually here in the U.S. And so I was always trying to sometimes play catch up and just be so involved in this American culture outside of the house. But now that I'm growing up, I'm in college, and I'm trying to re-practice my Farsi and relearn and solidify it, because I want to pass that down. I don't want it to go away. And so, yeah, I appreciate also taking your class, because I get to learn more about the Middle East, and that's something I feel like a lot of us don't have access to in the school systems here. So I guess that leads into my next question. Considering all of the social activism that you do and your nonprofit in Afghanistan, how do you stay connected to the Middle East and to everything going on there when you live here in America and the culture is so individualistic? And then on top of that, they dominate the news, and we're almost nowhere to be seen in the news, or the narrative will be skewed. So how do you stay in touch when you're almost so removed?
Well, when it's your profession, you have to stay connected. If I was in the business sector and working, in some private companies selling something, then maybe less so. It would be more difficult. And if I was a medical doctor and I was working in a hospital, it would be more difficult, because I would be focused primarily on providing health service and medical advice and my expertise to my patients, right? In my case, the Middle East is my profession. It's what I live and breathe. It's what I have to do professionally. And so from the minute that I wake up till the time I go to sleep, it's always on my mind. And so, because professionally I have to stay on top of it. So I'm constantly reading, I'm constantly engaged, constantly assessing what's happening. I'm constantly watching the news, following the news. And it requires it, not to mention academically reading about it in terms of what's the latest literature on this subject, what are the latest books on this topic, what are other professors saying, how is this region and the way it's viewed changing in terms of perceptions, not only academically, but also within the policy world and in Washington, D.C., for instance, as well as the general public in terms of how it's portrayed and conveyed in the news. How do journalists talk about it? How does the general public talk about it? How do politicians talk about it? How do average, everyday people talk about it? So I'm constantly in tune with that. And it's always nice when you pick a field professionally that you're also passionately interested in as well. It just becomes easier because this is something I want to do anyways. And certainly I would have been actively following the news in the Middle East, even let's say if I was a medical doctor or if I worked for some corporation or a tech company, for instance, I still would have been interested, but I wouldn't have had the same level of time and commitment to it because I would have had this other professional career. In my case, I've been living in this world and I've been doing it in two places. I do it not only in a university setting like here at Santa Clara, where I'm teaching classes on Middle East politics or U.S. foreign policy, dealing with the Middle East, and constantly involved with it in school with my students, but then also the work I do in Washington, D.C., and actively involved in policy world and how does the U.S. engage with the Middle East, what is our policy towards specific countries, how do we deal with specific policy questions, and so I'm immersed in that world as well. And these are two very different worlds that even though they cover the same subject matter often, the way you deal with it academically or in a teaching setting is very different than the way that policymakers deal with it. And so I've had the fortune to be immersed in both. And then on top of that, then you have Afghan Relief, which is a relatively new venture for me because it's something I've recently started in the last two and a half years. But it once again is now this case a humanitarian organization focused on addressing basic humanitarian concerns that Afghanistan is facing today. But once again, it's part of that broader region. And so in some ways, what I've done is I've purposefully focused and decided to pursue fields professionally that I knew I was personally very interested in. And so each of these have just overlapped with each other and allowed me to continually immerse myself in this region. And that's the best of both worlds. If one can find a job and a career that they absolutely are passionate about and they love.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think a lot of our interests naturally come with what we're constantly thinking about and what takes up our mental space, because then
That's right.
you're thinking about it already. Then, okay,
Yeah.
I'm going into work. Here, I already thought about it. Let me just put it into action.
That's right.
So, yeah, thank you for sharing those behind the scenes. I kind of wanted to follow up with that, like about the Middle East in general. As I've gotten to know my identity as an Afghan and, post 2021, U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, I've noticed how much my freedom as an Afghan or, advocating for my community relies on me also advocating for other communities within the Middle East and just beyond the Middle East. I think a lot of oppression and just social justice is all entrenched in each other. It's collective liberation. And so do you think that, was there a moment for you where, you were kind of learning about Afghanistan and your identity, and then you're like, wait, this is kind of similar to what's happening, in this country in the Middle East or this country? Like, was there a moment for you which you were kind of like connecting dots between issues?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think as I got more immersed in these topics, it started in college and then especially in graduate school as I became much more focused on it, you begin to see many of these strugglers are similar. Many of these issues that one country may have faced and one community may have faced, you begin to see that it applies elsewhere as well. And as I continued professionally, and then finished graduate school and then started teaching, and then became much more active, almost as an activist. And so on the one hand, there's this academic side of me that's always trying to remain very objective and neutral. But on the other hand, there's an activist side of me that's very immersed in the world of activism and community involvement and mobilizing the community. And you begin to connect with other groups and other communities, and you begin to see that the struggles that marginalized communities face, are very similar. And whether it's here in the United States or in other countries, you begin to see there's a lot in common there, and there's a lot that one can learn from each other. And so there's a learning aspect to it, plus there's bringing together resources and saying that, look, we're standing with you on this issue that you're concerned with. We'd like for you to stand with us on this other issue that we're concerned with. And so it's really about bringing together people that have similar experiences, even though the context may be different. Mm-hmm. And so whether it's African-Americans in the United States and their struggles, or Indigenous Americans here, or whether it's Arabs in Arab societies, or Palestinians, for instance, or whether it's Afghans. I mean, many of these are common struggles. They're struggles that deal with questions of liberation or freedom or self-determination or just basic dignity as human beings. And so all of that, there's a lot that's in common there. And certainly when it comes to the way that the U.S. has engaged with this region, and in terms of our foreign policy across the Middle East, or our wars in Afghanistan and wars in Iraq, there's a lot there that one can relate elsewhere as well and learn from it. And so the more that I was involved and started immersing myself in these fields, the more I started to realize that, look, there's a lot one can learn from these other experiences, and what can we take away from those experiences that help us better explain and understand what's happening within context of topics that I'm more focused on.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's definitely true that our liberation is tied in the liberation of another, and I think not just because of my identity, but just as a person, I feel so connected to, these broader struggles, like, for example, the Palestinian struggle for liberation. I just feel like, I need to be a part of it, just not even just as an Afghan, but just as a human. But I do think that identity of Afghan that I do have, it's like, I get it, in a sense. Obviously my struggle is not the same, but, when you have these outside factors and these people who, are not on your side, you want as many people as possible on your side. And so I'm just standing there like, okay, I need to support our community. Right. I kind of wanted to go back to our conversation. We're going to wrap it up soon, but I just wanted to do some follow-up questions. What would you say the key takeaways are here? How should people approach learning about their identity? I know it's a great thing and it's a beautiful thing, and I want everyone to celebrate it. But how do we approach that? And then, how do we remain active outside of our own identities and take other identities into consideration? Because as humans, we're all together. Nothing happens unless we all collectively agree on something. And so outside of ourselves, how can we take that beauty and help other people in their own identities?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I've said, identity is a beautiful thing. And being able to celebrate these differences in identity, that, where we come from, and with those identity comes, culture and how that culture shapes who you are. Being able to be proud of it, to not deny it, to not hide it, to be able to express it, to be able to share it, and for others to receive it that way, and to say that's a beautiful thing, and it's a beautiful thing or a beautiful aspect of your identity for us to see. And as I said, as human beings, we're very complex. We don't have one identity, and sometimes people try to have these very myopic and pigeonholed ideas that, you are X or you are Y, when in fact, people are very, very complex, and we have so many different identities. Unfortunately, there's always this aim sometimes to try to remove the diversity that's there, and trying to make people more and more similar, to say, look, you have to be a certain way. You have to, if you want to succeed, or if you wish to thrive in a society, you have to eliminate some aspects of your identity. It's, that's really unfortunate, because I think those diverse shades of gray and all the different ways that those identities are there really should be celebrated. It's really about celebrating them all, to say, here are all the different aspects of my identity as a person. There's so many things one can say about how we define that, whether it's your ethnic, racial, gender, sexual orientation, linguistic, you name it. There's so many different aspects of that identity that should be celebrated. And to say that these are all part of what makes me the person that I am, the unique person that I am. And I'm proud of all of them, not to deny it, not to hide it, and to be proud of it, and to be comfortable with that. And I think the more that we show comfort and confidence in our diverse identities, the more that it begins to be seen as, look, people have all of these different backgrounds, all these different aspects of their identity. And it then becomes much more common and accepted. I mean, you and I both shared, starting this conversation, about, when we were young and how we tried so hard to adjust. And yeah, I mean, I grew up in a town, as I said, that was predominantly white. And whether it was in Ohio or in Sacramento, there were no Afghans in my neighborhood. There were no, in fact, people of color was very, very limited, let alone people from other countries, and especially nobody from Afghanistan. So I consequently tried the best I could to be as similar to everybody else. And so, as I said, sports was that vehicle to do that. But part of it was to say, look, and I still remember the announcements that because the Friday night football games would be on the radio, and the announcers would say, we don't know where this young boy's from. We don't know if he might be from Pakistan or Afghanistan. And they'd pronounce it that way, and they'd say, we don't even know if he speaks English, but he sure knows how to run the ball, and he knows how to throw the ball. And these were the kinds of comments that we would get. But in a way, it was like, we don't care where he's from. We don't know what language he speaks, but he sure knows how to run with football. And that's all we care about. And in some ways, football then became a vehicle for me to feel like I belonged. And the town, which was a small town, Wilmington, of 10,000 people, in this small town, a Quaker town, predominantly farmers. Many people were farmers, white American farmers. They never seen somebody from another country. And so, but they accepted me because I was the school quarterback. And it was like, oh, he's a quarterback on our team, and therefore he's good at throwing the football and running the football, and he knows how to play football, and therefore that's all that matters to us. And therefore he's okay. But the problem with that is it forced me to hide other aspects of my identity because I was young, I was trying to assimilate, I was trying to feel accepted, and I didn't have enough confidence to share all those other aspects of my identity. Plus, there weren't other people around who looked like me or spoke my language that I could relate to. And so it wasn't until I got older and then started to see people from other places, especially coming to California, and then especially going to college and then graduate school, and start seeing people, diverse backgrounds, different ethnicities and racial backgrounds, linguistic backgrounds, different histories, and then seeing, you know what, this is something I should be proud of. So certainly, I think as you have expressed your thoughts of where you were when you were young and where you came to as you got older, it will continue, because I remember where I was in college. And in college, I was still relatively quiet about different aspects of my identity, including my Afghan identity, because I still wanted to feel like I belonged and welcomed. But when I got to graduate school, I think by graduate school, I started to feel much more comfortable with all these different aspects of my identity. And then, of course, beyond that, it became something I was very proud of and very openly started to express it as to, look, here are all the different aspects of who I am, and proud of it. And realize that, yes, as people get older, they're much more accepting of it. Certainly, I think there's bigotry out there, there's animosity out there, and one has to understand that that doesn't go away. And so, yes, at times, even today, I still see racism and bigotry because of these different aspects of who I am, and people then will use slur words against me just because of who I am. But, I think as you become older, you become more comfortable with it and learn to brush those off, because, bigotry and animosity towards people that are different will always be there. But certainly, I think as we get older, we also become much more comfortable and proud of who we are.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. I think you really hit the nail on that one. But I also think, as people start feeling more comfortable with their identities and expressing it, and as time goes on, we have all these rich cultures present in the U.S., I think it starts to give less value to those, bigots and those people making all these racist comments, because it's like, okay, what norm are you going off of now? There's no single category. There's no norm. There's a huge tapestry of how you could be. So I don't understand, what you're even saying right now. Yeah. So, I do think that moving forward, I think it's, as I've learned how beautiful it is to be proud of my identity, I think it's good for people to feel that same way. And I just wanted to share, one last thing. I think when I was growing up and I was so focused on, fitting in this American culture and, being one of the other, white girls, I kind of, got so used to hiding this part of me that I didn't really feel Afghan anymore until, we always got together with other Afghans. Fortunately, my cousins all went to high school with me, and we stayed really connected, and so that was really nice. But, obviously we went to school together. They almost kind of went through the same thing of assimilating, whereas in Sacramento, close to Sacramento and Elk Grove, there's a huge Afghan population now, and as I was growing up, more and more Afghans started coming to Sacramento and Elk Grove, and so we started meeting more people and just being around more Afghans that I was like, whoa, they're so Afghan, they're so proud of their culture, they speak really good Farsi, they're so cultured, and I started to feel like I didn't fit in. I was like, wait, now I'm kind of not Afghan, I look like a whitewashed girl to them now, kind of, and sometimes they would joke about that. It was kind of like a running joke. And so seeing my culture, I kind of made it more of my mission to be wait, no, I want to go back to that. I don't want to be an outsider to who I actually am anymore. I'm gonna stop hiding it.
And that's an excellent point. I mean, often when our parents have come here and we either were born elsewhere but came here at a young age or were born here, we're in this middle ground where we don't know where we fully belong. And so this identity crisis that many kids of immigrant families face, it's across the board. You see it, like they don't quite know where they fit in. They don't fully feel welcome and accepted in American culture because they're always seen as different. But on the other hand, yes, they sometimes forget their own language or some aspects of their culture from where their parents were from, and therefore they don't fully feel welcome there either. And therefore there's this identity crisis of like, where am I and where am I most comfortable? It's something that so many people face that have been in this dilemma. And that's why this first generation, second generation maybe less so, because, let's say your kids will be less likely to feel that than you will. But the point is that this slowly changes generationally. But we're in this middle, we're in the bridge between that culture and this culture. In my case, I was born there, but I came here at a young age, but still connected and roots are there while having lived and, educated here. In your case, you were born here, but still your family from there, connected there, that culture. So, it's very similar situation. And so it's difficult as to how to navigate this place, and for me, just like you, I think language was another important issue. Like I, like you, have always wanted to feel more comfortable speaking in my native language. And in my case, I spoke, when I was younger and lived in Afghanistan, I spoke Farsi fluently. And I spoke Pashto at home. So our family speaks Pashto at home. I spoke Farsi outside with my friends, living in Kabul, and going to a school that was Farsi speaking. All teachers were Farsi speaking, and the classes were all in Farsi. And so I was fluent in both languages. But then when I came to the United States, not only did my Farsi disappear in many ways because I wasn't using it. I know Farsi, I can respond to it, but I don't have it right there at the tip of my tongue, so I can't respond very quickly. And even my Pashto is relatively weak, you could say. So I can have basic conversations, and with Afghan Relief, all our meetings are either in Pashto or Farsi, and because our team is in Afghanistan speaking in one of those two languages, and I often really struggle trying to understand every aspect of what our team members are saying, and respond in Pashto if I can, and sometimes then we'll have to revert to English, and so it's an issue, and how do we retain that? Because I certainly would like to be able to speak both languages fluently, and so just like you. Sometimes people from Afghanistan will say, "Oh, you're too Americanized, and you've forgotten your roots, and you've forgotten your language, and you've forgotten, your Afghan culture. And there's so many aspects of the Afghan culture that you no longer practice or incorporate into your everyday life." And so certainly, I think you and I have that same experience that, we get that pushback from both sides, and that's why it makes it difficult, like trying to adjust and wanting to feel comfortable in both settings.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I definitely completely relate. It's like you're in between,
totally in between
two doors, like,
that's right.
And it's hard because you want to fit in with both, but in order to fit in with one of them, you kind of have to disconnect from the other one a little bit.
Exactly.
And I think maybe that's what's happening to me growing up now. I'm letting go of some of the Americanized things that I guess I did so that I can get used to those Afghan things and, try to implement it more in my life. And, I don't know. I'm okay with, I guess, shutting out this door that I was so was so open for me growing up, so that I can go back to this other door. And I think it's a beautiful thing because it helps me kind of understand my family better, my parents' stories, and kind of just, it helps me appreciate like all they did for me and all the sacrifices they made. So I want to continue celebrating that identity and like being proud of it and making them hopefully one day feel comfortable in it too. Because I mean, even my parents, even though they almost fully still kind of fit in with their Afghan side, I mean, even they'd be called Americanized now, but they'll still feel like bad about sharing their identity. They'll in certain settings still feel uncomfortable, sharing that they're Afghan. And I know that's because of what they've experienced growing up,
Right.
coming here to America and barely knowing English, learning little bits and pieces in Afghanistan in school, but then coming here and like not having any foundation, you're made to feel like an outsider. So I think my parents put in so much work to finally, plant their seeds and feel like they fit in this place. Whereas for me, I fit in, but then I don't want to almost because I'm like, no, you had to make that sacrifice, and I don't want you to sacrifice that anymore. I want to bring that culture back for you, and I want it to continue through my family. When I grow older and I have kids, I want your culture to be reflected in them. So, yeah.
No, I think that's really nice. And, as I said, as you get older, you become more proud of it and wanting to connect more to it. And so, I've seen my evolution in this regard for many, many years, even sort of focused on the Middle East. I mean, you look at a broad region, but not Afghan-centric at all. Mm-mm. And often my family would say, you've devoted your entire professional career to dealing with the Middle East. Why don't you focus on Afghanistan? Yeah. Why have you forgotten Afghanistan? Like that was a common statement my family had always made. Mm-hmm. Why have you forgotten Afghanistan? And I always say, look, I haven't forgotten Afghanistan. Afghanistan is part of the region that I study, but it's just one of the countries that I study. And I study the broader region, but Afghanistan isn't my exclusive focus. Mm-hmm. But over time, it started to become more a country that I started to look at more closely and focus on, and culturally, and then engaged with. Mm-hmm. And, as I've moved academically from dealing with the Middle East, and I've been involved, as I said, with a number of think tanks and nonprofit organizations. Most of those dealt with broader topics on Muslim politics or Middle East politics. And now I have a humanitarian organization that's called Afghan Relief. It's Afghan-centric. It's all about Afghanistan. And it's remarkable that my family in some ways now, and it, says, finally, after all these years, now towards later in your career, you've decided to put more attention on Afghanistan. So I've naturally come here. And I think that has been an evolution for me, partly because I feel like, there's so much that can be done, and so much that can be done to help a country like Afghanistan. And so I'm committed to doing that, and it's very comfortable doing that as well. And so that's been my journey, you could say, over all these decades, and where I've ended up today. Your journey in many ways will be quite, it'll be unique, but in some ways it may have similarities in terms of where you have been, where you are today, and where you're going to go in the future. But I certainly think that you're gonna face many of the same questions, and it'll be just really nice to see where you end up, like what you will do professionally, as well as how you will relate to your culture, your Afghan culture, and how you see yourself, and how you continue to live that aspect of your life. How will you raise your kids, and what aspects of Afghan culture will your kids pick up, and will Farsi be part of what you speak with your kids? it would be nice if that continues. Unfortunately, that's not always easy because too often, kids just want to speak in English and respond in English, and consequently the language is forgotten. And so, I think that's really, really great to hear your stories and how there's similarities there between our stories. But I think it's a common story for immigrants generally, and Afghans in particular, for both of us.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing your stories too. It's really nice to just connect over that.
Yeah.
And, I wanted to say to the podcast in general, I know our stories have been very Afghan-centric, but I hope that this resonates for, other immigrant families or just people, facing the same kind of thoughts. And I just hope it resonates. But, we focused on the Afghan side, obviously, because this conversation's about identity. We're both Afghan, and I just wanted to say thank you for your time, and it was really nice to have you on here.
Well, thank you so much, Suzan, for this opportunity. I mean, I really appreciate it. I'm honored to be part of this podcast and this conversation. I think it was really a wonderful conversation. We dealt with a lot. We covered a lot of different aspects. Both of us were open in expressing our own personal experiences and the identities that we have, and hopefully, others listening will get something out of it. As you said, it's one story from two people that are Afghan-Americans, and I hopefully for others listening with their own identities, their own experiences, their own history and culture, it'll be something that they can relate with and something they can benefit from. So, if it was a learning experience for any of you listening, we really feel that was the aim. And so hopefully you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Farid. I second everything you just said.
Yes.
Thank you so much.